All right. Today is Tuesday, October 28th, and this is a recap for the stock market activities today. And folks, I got a good one for you tonight. And we are right now in perhaps the most important week for the stock market for the remainder of the year. Because whatever happens this week will paint the tape for the remainder of the year. You got a bullish argument that says that everything is going to come out fine from this week. Then we're going to paint the tape and play the seasonality, the so-called Santa Claus rally, all the way till the end of the year. And then we have a bearish argument suggesting that something is not going to come out right this week, painting the tape negatively for the remainder of the year. In any case, it seems that this week, 2 days in, is already feeling longer than the Dodgers game last night. And then Friday, we finish with Halloween. And the question is, will we have a terrifying end of the week? For that, let's explore more and begin the conversation here, folks, with an old topic that we haven't visited in a long time, the wall of worry. And in the wall of worry, we have three immediate items: the China trade war, and after that, the Fed monetary policy, and then, of course, big cap technology earnings. Now, I know that we have other items in the wall of worry, such as the geopolitics and what's going on with the regional banks and what's going on with the consumer. But these three are the most immediate for this week. These are the ones that are going to be making or breaking the stock market for the remainder of the year. It's going to happen, all of it. It's going to happen this week. And the market believes already that we've defeated at least two of these items. And the third, the market doesn't seem to be concerned about at all. The market assumes that the China trade spat is over. We got some word from the president that we had a good meeting again with the Chinese. And there is, of course, the moment of truth when Trump meets Xi this Thursday. But the market seems to say, okay, the trade war is over. We are done. We're not going to worry about the trade war. Now, when it comes to the Federal Reserve's interest rate policy, the market seems not to be concerned at all. The market says that we have interest rates coming in the bag, and they will happen as soon as tomorrow. Some are betting for even 50 basis points in tomorrow's meeting. And when it comes to the third item, the big tech earnings, AI, the market assumes that's going to be fine and there's nothing really to worry about. And we see some sort of a FOMO breakout in the market based on the elimination of these three items, at least in the market's mind right now. And that suggests that the element of surprise is actually on the side of bears, that things could go contrary to expectations in one or more of these items, and we end up with a disappointment that paints the tape negatively all the way till the end of the year. Let's explore the problems with the market's assumption that these three items are completely resolved right now. When it comes to the China trade war, all what we've gotten so far, that we have a framework with the Chinese. We agreed on a framework. We've agreed on a framework back in the summer, in June. This is the second time that the administration pauses the increase in tariffs and agree on a framework, and we're going to continue to talk. And then the conversation drags on, and here comes another threat of tariffs, and then they sit down, agree on another framework of the previous framework, and the talks shall continue. But no substantial agreements, nothing really tangible. That begs the question, is the market just looking for endless extensions of the trade talks with China? At some point, we have to face the music. Do we have a deal or we don't have a deal with China? Now, what does that mean about the tariffs? Are we going to increase the tariffs or keep them as they are and admit defeat? All of these are good questions. And right now, we're assured, at least by Secretary Bessent, the soybean farmer, that the most burning issue between the two nations, rare earth metals, has been resolved. The Chinese decided to extend their export controls for rare earth metals, and we have a deal. We have a framework pending a signature ceremony between Trump and Xi this Thursday. But here's the problem. Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng held negotiations that the U.S. characterized as constructive, but sources told the Financial Times China was reluctant to ease export controls, talking about rare earth metals. So bear in mind the contrast between the two narratives that I've been talking about for a while. You have Bessent with the usual bullshit. Oh, we met in Madrid, we met in London, we met in Geneva. We talked about talking with the Chinese. And everything is great, but the Chinese say different things. Their tone is more defensive, their tone is more negative. And then sooner than later, we begin to find the Secretary Bessent and the administration beginning to attack back the Chinese. So who's telling the truth here? We're not going to find out till Thursday. What if the Chinese say, no, we don't have an agreement on rare earth metals. We don't have any reason to flood your market as Donald Trump suggested with rare earth metals and give you unlimited access to that supply. Why would we do that? We have no deal. The only deal we're going to have is just buying some soybeans, and that's it. If Beijing refuses to budge and talks between Trump and Xi on Thursday don't result in a deal to roll back export controls, U.S. tariffs on China would soar to 157%. In addition, other countries may increasingly side with Washington, overcoming earlier backlash against the U.S. over Trump's global tariffs. In other words, we're going to have our allies, the Chinese will have theirs, or we're going to go in a global trade war. And that changes the game, because at some point you can bark all you want. If you're not going to follow in the tariff threat, then nobody's going to take you seriously. The Chinese know that you're going to tackle the moment the market goes down. They have no incentive to negotiate. Matter of fact, the headline reads, China's industrial profits surged 21.6% in September, the biggest jump in nearly 2 years. So all of this talk about, the Chinese economy is collapsing, Mav, and we got all the cards, and you have Trump saying that Xi doesn't want a depression in China. I don't see depression right here. I see what we're doing right now in our economy is closer to the late 1920s that could lead to a Great Depression than what's going on in China. Does the Chinese economy have problems? Of course. But when it comes to the leverage, obviously the Chinese have more leverage than we do. And there is a huge possibility comes Thursday and we have no substantial agreement on rare earth metals. Maybe all of what we're going to get is China will commit to buying some soybeans from U.S. farmers, and the U.S. will reduce some of those tariffs to allow the Chinese to buy the soybeans. They haven't been buying American soybeans because since the first trade war with President Trump, the Chinese replaced U.S. farmers with Brazilian and Argentinian farmers. So again, it's an act of charity. If the Chinese decide to buy soybeans from U.S. farmers, they're doing the president a favor. In exchange, he's going to reduce the tariffs, or at least extend the talks about the talks and not implement the new tariffs. The market is pricing in the best case scenario that we have a trade deal including rare earth metals. All what I see here is a bunch of commitments, maybe phony commitments, that China will buy some U.S. soybeans, and we're going to extend the talks about the talks for longer. And that's not the ideal scenario that the market is pricing in right now. Furthermore, there is possibility that things will go wrong. For example, today we got that the FCC voted to tighten restrictions on Chinese tech companies, deemed as a threat. How would the Chinese receive this news? How will it impact the negotiations between Trump and Xi this Thursday? There is an element of surprise that could disappoint the market. Meaning, suppose we get to Thursday, things don't work out as anticipated. Comes Friday, and Trump has a nasty tweet saying that my friend Xi, he wants to decouple or whatever, and we have massive tariffs and a global trade war against China and its allies. The market is not even prepared for such scenario. You will see massive explosions in volatility and huge flush downs in the market. So that's landmine number one, which the market right now says I'm not worried about at all. The second landmine is the Fed's policy. Again, the market is pricing in based on the CPI report that we got last week, which, by the way, showed an inflation handle of 3% when the Fed's target is 2%. We have moved from the 2s to the 3s, and the market thinks that's progress against inflation. How delusional. But of course, the Fed is now all corrupted and politicized that the facts don't really matter. The Fed is going to cut rates either way. That's the assumption by the market right now. Matter of fact, we're pricing in a cut of 25 basis points to the tune of 99% odds that the Fed will do it. The odd for a hold is only 1.1%. What if the Fed comes out tomorrow and says, we don't have enough data to make a decision right now, so we're going to pause, we're not going to do anything. And if we get the data and it merits a rate cut, okay, we'll do 50 basis points in December. Is the market prepared for such scenario? The answer is no. That's another reason for volatility to explode higher and the market to flush down big. And honestly, it leads to a bigger debate. Why are we cutting rates? Like I said before, inflation is not moving toward the Fed's target. It's moving away from it. It's not a 2, it's a 3 now. So why are we cutting rates again? The argument is, well, we have weakness in the labor market. We talked about the reasons why. I mean, they have a really weird dynamic where you got government spending on healthcare because of the aging population, keeping healthcare jobs intact in the market. We see big growth and additions to jobs and more demand for more jobs. And then we have, because of the stock market mania, the affluent consumer doing fine and spending on leisure and hospitality. And we see jobs creation in that sector intact. But besides these two, it is a disaster. On one hand, you have AI eliminating a lot of jobs. On the other hand, you have weakness from the consumer. The regular consumer, the non-affluent consumer. We see auto loan delinquencies skyrocketing. We see credit card delinquencies moving higher. We see a lot of folks falling behind in their rents. We see a lot of consumers using buy now, pay later for groceries. And that means that they have to cut spending elsewhere. And this is why we see the rate of job creation in retail stores, for example, in other sectors of the economy going weak. So the Fed is in a weird situation, and they have nobody else to blame but themselves, by the way. Had they done the job right and allowed the economy to dip into a recession, which is, again, part of the natural cycle of the economy. The job of a recession is to reset the economic cycle, to wash out inflation out of the economy, to wash out excess out of the economy, and create new opportunities that are inclusive to the population, not just limited to the affluent or the top 10 or 1%. But the Fed wanted to play God. The Fed wanted to prevent a recession and at the same time declared that inflation has been defeated. And they thought they can have it both ways. Eliminate a recession, have no inflation, and everything is going to work out fine. And they created this really unfortunate position for the Federal Reserve. Or damned if you do, damned if you don't. Damned if you do, meaning if you cut rates, because what could be argued as legitimate weakness in the jobs market, we'll talk about that in a second, but the consequence of that will be inflation and perhaps higher unemployment. Yesterday, we got the headline that Amazon will cut 30,000 jobs. And I said that the Fed thinks cutting rates will prevent this. The truth is, it will make it cheaper for Amazon to borrow money, expand AI roles, and fire more employees. Amazon is not letting go of these employees because interest rates are too high. They're not letting go of these jobs because they're being hurt financially. They're not doing pretty good in the economy. No, their monopoly is doing fine. So how would interest rate cuts prevent Amazon from letting go of these 30,000 jobs? Ain't going to do shit. Again, if anything, it's going to make it cheaper for Amazon to get more loans at cheaper interest rates and continue to develop these AI roles and replace more and more human jobs. Now, the Fed is also damned if they don't do anything. If they continue to hold or say, okay, we're not going to cut rates, because outside of AI jobs replacement, such as what we've seen in Amazon and Meta, even Meta laid off 600 employees within the AI unit. These AI engineers were victims of Darwinism. They created their own monster that took out their jobs. And you have a company like Chegg now slashing 45% of the workforce because the realities of AI. It's not because they're implementing AI, because AI makes their business obsolete. So there are two sides of the story here, where you have AI being used as a tool of efficiency by corporations. These happen to be large corporations, and the expense is higher unemployment, letting go of a lot of jobs. At the same time, the deployment of AI is making other companies obsolete. Their business is not doing pretty good, and they're letting go of employees. But the Fed damned if they don't do anything. If they say, okay, AI is responsible for all of this job loss, and cutting rates is not going to prevent it. So we're just going to sit here, hold, pose the rates. We're not going to cut them. Well, they're damned if they do that too, because we have, as you've seen today, UPS, a cyclical company in the economy, announcing cutting 48,000 jobs in management and operation. You have Target retail store cutting 1,800 corporate jobs. And you have Paramount cutting 1,000 jobs. These are at least the latest ones that we've seen. And it begs the question, is this a product of legitimate weakness in the economy? Is it because the consumer is so squeezed that they're not spending anymore, they're not shopping at Target anymore, they're not subscribing to Paramount anymore, and they're not buying stuff to keep UPS business going? And the argument would be, hey, Fed, if you don't cut rates, you're probably going to see more of this. You're going to see regular companies letting go of employees not because of AI, but because they're doing financially worse. Again, I have no empathy for the Fed. They placed themselves in this position, but the problem is who's going to pay the price, whatever the consequence is. Cutting rates, allowing inflation to go higher, more AI, jobs losses, or is it not cutting rates and then allowing the economy to get weaker? Who's going to pay the price at the end of the day? It's us. It's the regular folks. And the Fed just says, oh, oops, we made another mistake. And the Fed chairman gets a job at PIMCO, and the Fed governor gets a job at Goldman Sachs, and they get to retire in beachfront homes, while regular folks pay the dire price. You can see from these two headlines I'm showing you right now the contrast in the economy that the Fed has created. The Fed is responsible for this. By preventing a recession and easing the monetary policy when it's not needed, they have created a stock market mania bubble. And the result of that is the rich are just spending and splurging and doing better than ever before. Headline reads, rich flyers are making United and Delta billions by buying premium perks. If you look at the earnings of these two companies, the economy class cabin where regular folks fly, not doing pretty good. They're only beating and making money right now because the affluent consumer is spending insane amounts on first-class tickets and all of these perks. They don't really care what they're paying right now, so long as the market keeps going up. At the same time, the other reality that the Fed has created is this. 2 in 5 U.S. workers have delayed or canceled major purchases, such as homes or cars, due to job security concerns. Maybe that's reflecting on some of the layoffs that we see from regular companies. And at some point, the two worlds will collide. At some point, with these companies, AI companies, keep doing massive layoffs, well, these employees who used to be employed by Amazon and Meta and whatnot, they were doing spending in the economy too. They were going to the grocery shop. They were buying stuff from the department stores and online shopping and all of that. They're going to have to cut spending now that they lost their jobs. And they joined the ranks of the folks who were already feeling the pain. And when we begin to see widespread economic weakness and pulled back in spending by the consumer across the board in the economy, you think that's not going to show up in corporate results at some point? You think that's not going to deter a lot of these big cap technology companies to reduce the amount of spending? Because right now they're living in a bubble that is isolated from reality. They're spending hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars building data centers all over the place and overspending on stuff because they have FOMO. They have to spend, otherwise the other company will spend and have the lead in AI. Meanwhile, who's going to buy this shit anyways? When you have consumers living paycheck to paycheck, and even the affluent consumer who's working in Amazon, who's working in Meta, is getting fired. Who's going to do the spending in the economy? When will these companies wake up and realize that they're just overspending and the demand will never meet the supply that they're creating right now? I think they're going to realize that too late. That leads us to the third element of the wall of worry, which is big tech earnings. The market says everything is fine. We're not worried about it at all. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that these companies will produce massive numbers in revenue and profits and might as well just do the beats. Oh, the company beat some analyst expectations. Who gives a shit? The problem is, what do we see going forward? Do we see the growth rate in spending, expenses, CapEx, growing faster and higher than the growth rate in revenue generating? Once the market sniffs that, the game is over. And it could happen as soon as this week. Bull market's make or break week arrives with big tech earnings. And bear in mind that mechanically, October 10th, when the market flushed down, we've seen the VIX printing a sizable move in a short amount of time. But the response by the market was not matching, as you can see right here. To me, that's a massive sign of complacency, that the market assumes that nothing will go wrong this week or beyond. We're not going to have any problem with trade. We're not going to have any problem with the Fed policy. We're not going to have problems with any of these big cap technology earnings. What if it goes wrong, though? I see this as a massive warning sign that if things go wrong this week, we will see one of the biggest explosions in the VIX, and this time the market will respond properly. Keep that in mind. Now, the other wild card is a lot of the earnings for the Mag 7 come from overseas, and we've seen a lot of these economies where we see consumer weakness, we see currencies going down, we see purchasing power being reduced. How would that impact corporate spending overseas with these magnificent 7 U.S. companies? But the most important question this earnings season is, you look at the CapEx, quarterly CapEx spending. Amazon through the roof. Microsoft, the same story. Alphabet, they're doing the same. All of them are spending over $20-30 billion a pop because, once again, they're FOMO spending because if I don't do it, Amazon will do it. If I don't do it, Microsoft will do it. If I don't do it, Alphabet will do it. But they're spending now, asking questions later, such as, are we overspending on the first phase of this technology, which might not be the dominant form of this technology? years from now. We all remember the early dot-com days and all of the so-called promising businesses that went bust, and only few survived. And the same thing will happen in AI. You could have a model right now that you really believe in, you think it's going to be the future, but it becomes obsolete later down the line. So is the excessive spending right now justified? And furthermore, is the excessive spending right now will find demand from the consumers? It seems to me that the AI companies think that the economy is going to evolve where we see jobs by AI, consumption happening by AI, robots doing the consumption in the economy. They're absolutely delusional. You have no economy without the consumer, and the consumer is going bust. So why do we see this excessive spending right here? And at what point? Because the market can excuse it. It's okay, you're spending all of these tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in capex, building AI data centers, you're hoarding chips that could be obsolete 2 years from now. But that's okay, so long as you guys are producing revenue growth. What if we begin to see the rate of revenue growth slowing down, but the rate of spending on capex going higher? As soon as the market sniffs that, they know that margins will be reduced down the line, and they're going to begin to dump these stocks ahead of time. And the market is pricing in a lot of spending, by the way. If you look at the year 2026, the estimate is that these companies, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, Alphabet, will spend over $430 billion in capex. That's what the market is pricing in right now. And says, okay, but there is no recession, there is no crash, because with these massive spending in the economy, that's enough to create some jobs right now, to keep the market intact. All of this circular spending will prevent any problem in the economy. But what if these companies wake up to the reality that they're overspending and they're not generating enough revenue growth to justify that spending? And oh, by the way, weakness in the consumer and all the stuff that we just talked about. And they begin to pull back in that spending. That's going to be the problem. And again, the market will sniff all of that ahead of time. Think about a company like Meta. They're spending like a drunken sailor again. CapEx is now surging toward 70 billion plus. And that's okay for now because the market looks at the revenue growth by Meta in the last quarter, which we dubbed as the best quarter ever. And they see massive numbers of growth in revenue and say, okay, that's okay. They can afford to spend. At some point, that's the inevitable. We will see the growth rate in revenue slowing down in Meta and many other companies, and the rate growth in spending continuing. And it could happen again as soon as this earnings season. Is the market really prepared for such outcome? Of course not. When you look at the cloud business, the revenue generation in these big cap technology companies that are spending, all of the spending that Amazon has done, AWS did not show any growth from Q1 24 to Q3 25. It's a small, minuscule rate of growth in comparison to what they're spending. And the same thing can be said with Google. They're not showing revenue expansion. They peaked in Q3 24. Microsoft is the only one that's showing growth, but is it really justified? This little bit of growth that we got from the company, meanwhile, they're spending a ton of cash. I expect to see higher growth rates. I think the market right now, the bar has been set way too high, where the market is also expecting massive rates of growth. If these companies fail to show that, then we will see a sharp correction that the market is not prepared for. We've expanded the valuations of these companies, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, from the 2023 announcement of Microsoft investing in ChatGPT, OpenAI. We've expanded these valuations from 4 or 5 trillion to now 10 trillion plus. At some point, the music stops. When margin expansion peaks and begins to slow down. When the market realizes that the rate of growth in spending is exceeding the rate of growth in revenue. And at some point, these companies will be forced to pull back the spending. Then the party stops. And are we really prepared as an economy, forget about the market, but as an economy, for reducing the market cap of these companies from the 13 trillion plus that it is right now back to, let's say, 6 trillion, if not even less than that? You think that's going to happen amicably, by the way? Think again. The other thing you need to think about is a lot of the AI projects that are being created right now are not producing results. So there's a lot of spending, a lot of expectations, but in reality, we're not seeing tangible outcomes from all of that spending. A widely cited MIT study earlier this year found out that more than 300 AI projects analyzed, only about 5% delivered measurable gains. Most AI projects stall at the pilot stage due to weak integration into workflows and models that failed the scale, the study found. We have a lot of concerns about this bubble, folks. It ain't just the over-promising and the lack of results that we see right now. It's the circular spending between these companies. They've ran out of customers. They have to create customers by their own money. It's when you look at the entanglements. A company like NVIDIA sold all of these chips for billions of dollars at insane pricing, at bubble pricing. They could have just stayed in cash, did what Warren Buffett is doing, stick the cash, get some yield, and then wait for the crash, the recession, then scoop the leftovers for pennies on the dollar with the cash, the massive amount of cash that you got. But NVIDIA is now being entangled with investments in OpenAI, investments in CoreWeave, investments in smaller companies. And if these things go bust, NVIDIA will get damaged. And we're talking about now a $5 trillion company. Let's say the valuation of NVIDIA, because one of these investments or some of them blow up, didn't produce tangible results, and we see a crash in the market, and NVIDIA goes from a $5 trillion valuation to $2.5 or $2 trillion. Again, you think the shave off that $3 trillion will happen amicably? Think again. So anyhow, folks, to wrap up this conversation, we go back to the wall of worry. We got China trade, we got the Fed policy, we got AI earnings. The market right now assumes that all good, all passed, even without seeing the final results. I think that's delusional. I think that's cocky. I think that's complacency. And I just explained to you in details what could go wrong in all of these assumptions from all of these items. But with that being said, this wraps up the first part of our conversation tonight. We're going to continue the conversation by doing the market coverage. This is going to be for the members in this channel. We're going to cover the market action in details, what's going on in the options market, the unusual trades, the charts, the technicals, and all of that. That's going to be members exclusive, coming out right after this video. So if you happen to be a member, please don't forget to watch the market coverage, part number 2. If you're not a member, consider joining us and don't miss out on all of the conversations that we have. But anyhow, folks, this is all I got for you for now. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I appreciate and I love all of you. And I'll be talking to you again tomorrow. Good night.